All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And good evening, one and all, and welcome back to the X Zone. I am Rob McConnell, and for the next 2 hours, I'm your host and your guide as together we will cross the time-space continuum to this place that I call the X Zone. It's a place where people dare to believe and dare to be heard. It's a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. And as you know, the X Zone comes to you Monday through Friday, Eastern, right here on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and our favorite AM station across Canada. And of course, that is your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ AM here in St. Catharines, Ontario, just down the street from us here in our studios. And CFAJ, they have such a signal throughout the main parts of Ontario, Toronto, Mississauga, oh my gosh, London, the whole bit, as well as throughout the Niagara region, the northern parts of the United States, and not the northern parts of the United States, not all of them, the northern part of the state of New York and Pennsylvania. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all messenger services, as well as all platforms, X-Zone Radio TV. X-Zone Nation, my guest tonight, this first hour on the X-Zone, we're going to be joined by Peter METZNER, a highly respected executive coach, leadership development expert, and founder of Dynamic Change, Inc. Now, with a background in psychology and a career dedicated to empowering individuals and transforming organizations, Peter has worked with Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, universities, and nonprofits to develop emotionally intelligent, mindful leaders. His unique blend of evidence-based coaching, organizational insight, and passion for personal growth makes him a true catalyst for positive change. Peter joins us today to talk about how we can lead with intention, navigate change with confidence, and build stronger, more resilient teams. Joining me now is Peter METZNER. And Peter, welcome back to the show.
Well, thank you, Rob. Such an honor and pleasure to be back.
These are very strange times, no matter where you look on this beautiful big earth of ours. And we decided that we'd like to get you to give some positivity and help us be better people. So thank you for joining us tonight. Peter, can you tell us what inspired you to found Dynamic Change, Inc.?
Okay, I guess the first thing, I realized that most places I was a non-fit, which was kind of a curse, but a blessing. So I realized that I was happiest when I was independent. The more autonomy I had and the more independence to pursue and study and learn what I wanted to learn, the better. And then I realized whatever I learned, whatever I experienced, I ended up teaching, training, and coaching on. And then I was the big aha, the big duh. That's who I am. That's in my DNA. And that's something we'll be talking about today. What's our DNA in our career? What's distinguishable, notable, and authentic about us? And for me, my DNA is that of a teacher, coach, trainer. And I have been focused on the last 30 plus years or more on what does it look like to be fully human, to be a fully functioning, actualizing, individuating human being.
How did your background in psychology and organizational development shape your coaching methodology?
Well, I think it was really integral for me to be in the corporate world. And I was in the corporate world overall for about 15, 16 years. And I had
Hmm.
some great bosses, some bosses that were very vexing and trying. And I didn't feel like I could really do the work that I do unless I experienced what it's like to be in a corporate world. So I think that's the street cred. And it occurred to me, that there is such a need for leaders. And I think there's a duty and a responsibility for leaders to become whole, to become healthy, to live mindfully, purposefully, and with integrity. And I saw there's a huge need for that. And so that was my calling, you could say. And it was actually a midlife crisis that spurred me to action.
You've worked with a wide range of clients, Peter, corporate, government, nonprofit. What unique challenges do these different sectors face when it comes to true leadership?
Well, I think a lot of the pressure is the bottom line,
Mm.
and shareholders, they want a return on their investment, and corporations with the profit mindset, and that's of course, that's where they are. It's neither good nor bad, but for companies to stay afloat, they need to make a profit, and there's a real risk of trying to extract as much from as few people as possible. So the stress can be immense. And then with all the changes that we've had, just think about the changes we've had with tariffs,
Hmm.
the uncertainty about tariffs, the reorganization of the government and businesses adapting to it. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty and stress and anxiety. And this is when we are at our worst, when we're operating out of fear and anger and uncertainty. So I think for me, the real calling is to how do we create islands of sanity, and what does it look like to be calm, to be mindful, and to be as healthy as possible as we navigate this inflection point that's happening on so many levels.
Peter, what do you believe is the most common misconception about leadership that is out there today?
Well, a lot of people get promoted because they get results, and so that's good. But just because somebody is a star performer, get results, doesn't mean that they're good or bad leader. And so, John Maxwell said it better than I could. He's a very famous and well published leadership coach, and he said that leaders, great leaders, have the uncanny ability to activate positive emotions in others. So there's that sense of instilling in people that I matter, what I say matters, what we
Hmm.
do matters, and what we're doing as an organization is very important. And when you have that, and when you have that shared vision, it unleashes quite a bit of passion. We could say that genius is focused passion. And when we feel like we are all aligned and have the shared vision that we all believe in, it can unleash an incredibly powerful movement towards change and growth.
Can you explain the difference between managing people and truly leading them?
So I guess the metaphor would be the best. So if we are leading, if there's a forest, we're actually above the tree line and we're seeing, here's where the path is going to be. Here's where we want to go. And the managers are going to make sure that we execute and build that path. But the leader is actually, has that vision. But I'd like to say it's a shared vision often. And great leaders have also the ability to say, not only do I have this vision, but
Hmm.
to embrace and draw out the intellect and the experience of others so that it's truly a shared vision. So the leadership is actually, this is the vision, and the management will be, to me, based more on the executing of that vision.
Okay, I understand that. In your coaching experience, what are the top qualities of an effective leader?
Gosh, well, I'd say any personality style could be a good leader. I do a lot of work with personality, and every personality type, whether you look at Myers Briggs, a DISC, or other four quadrants. But I think one thing great leaders have in common: they're self-aware,
Hmm.
they're doing their work, they're mindful of their shadows. You and I have had talks about that. They're
Yeah.
mindful of those things that they're unaware of, and they are able to forge good relationships. Google did a project called the Aristotle Project fairly recently. And what they found, and it's also mirrored in the literature, that the most important factor for team performance is psychological safety. And that's, based on trust. And that is the most important factor. So a great leader, has the ability to instill psychological safety and also be strong enough, mature enough to own what he or she needs to own and clean it up.
So
So
psychological safety would mean how the how the leader gets the followers to trust him or her.
yes, that let's say if you and I have psychological safety, which I think we do, I can be real. I mean, you have a great uncanny ability to draw out the best in your guests, I've noticed. And so when we feel safe, we feel that it is okay to be genuine, to be authentic, to even be vulnerable, to say, hey, I don't know. I don't have the answer to this. I need some help.
Yeah.
And when there's psychological safety, then it really does bond us, and it helps us get the work done without having to be defensive, critical, blaming, or defensive because we're being shamed.
How do you help your clients develop emotional intelligence? And why is it so critical in leadership?
Yeah, there is a book by Daniel Goldman, EQ, Why It's More Important Than IQ. And the Center for Creative Leadership did a 33-year study, the top Fortune 500 companies. And what they found that the most effective leaders, they weren't the smartest. They didn't have the highest IQ, but they did have above average emotional intelligence. And I guess first to understand how to develop it, and yes, it can be developed, let's just define it very briefly.
Okay.
So the foundation of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, basically awareness of my emotions, awareness of my strengths, awareness of my weaknesses. But the self-awareness is the foundation. And then the body of it, you could say, is self-mastery. And self-mastery is the ability to manage our emotions productively. I don't like the word control, but manage them. And the heart of EQ is interpersonal skill based on empathy. And all these things can be developed. Self-mastery, we could say, in part is overriding our conditioning, the way we've been conditioned as kids or early on. But it's also being able to have an emotion like anger, which can right a wrong, change a bad policy. But anger is a very hard emotion to deal with at the right time, the right place, the right amount. So the self-mastery piece is saying, I'm aware of my emotions. They are informing me. They're real. And here's what that emotion is telling me I need to address. And what gets many people in trouble is when they are driven by negative emotions like fear, and if one leader is fear-based, can create an entire climate of fear in the organization. What we control, what we fear, we try to control. And, when people are micromanaging, that's often a fear-based behavior. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be the way it's right. Otherwise, they get in trouble. And when somebody's being micromanaged, they get a sense, oh, this person doesn't trust me. They're controlling me. And thus, it leads to very negative outcomes.
Not to mention failure.
Yes.
All right, Peter, please stand by. You and I have to take our first break for this first segment of the show. At Exonation, our guest this hour is Peter METZNER. And if you'd like to find out more about Peter, visit his website, dynamicchangeinc.com. That's www.dynamicchangeinc.com. Peter and I will return on the other side of this short break as we continue here in the X Zone with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and of course, your hometown radio, Classic 1220, CFAJ AM. And for goodness sake, do me a favor. If you're going to listen to the show and you're going to start boogieing to the bumpers that we play, if you're driving, do me a favor, just kind of pull over to the side of the road. Yeah, I love dancing too, but, the Niagara Regional Police and OPP really don't like it when we start swerving all over the roads. Food for thought, Exonation. I'll be back on the other side of this break, and you're listening to us. If you're streaming us, you are? Good for you guys. Proud of you. Classic1220.ca. Don't go away. And welcome back. Peter METZNER is our special guest this hour, Exonation, www.dynamicchangeinc.com. com. Peter, how can organizations best prepare for and manage change in today's fast-paced world? It must be so hard, not only because of the speed at which business runs, but now with the tariffs, in, out, on, off, left, right, center, who knows? This must be
Yes.
awfully hard on the businesses and
It,
organizations.
for many, that's very true. Not to mention the disruption of AI.
Mm-hmm.
What AI can do is give some people superpowers, but for some it could displace them. So that's a really huge topic, change, and we're in an inflection point. We're going through many changes. We've look at the climate, the economy,
Oh
the
my gosh, yeah.
geopolitical conflicts as
Mm-hmm.
well. So I'd say the first thing for each of us individually, and I'll quote Carl Jung. Somebody asked him after the hydrogen bomb exploded in the early 50s in a lecture, said, Dr. Young, is there hope for the world? Because then it was realized the world could end at the push of a button.
Yeah.
And he thought carefully and he said, yes, there is hope if enough of us do our inner work. And so, in other words, when we as individuals do our inner work, become more self aware,
Mm-hmm.
and come to the realization, as Desmond Tutu would say, that we're all family. Some of these more illumined people like Nelson Mandela,
Yeah.
Desmond Tutu, Martin Luther King, that you know what, we're all family, and we all are trying to do the same thing to live, to be help our kids grow,
Mm-hmm.
and to live a productive life. And so I think there has to be more and more people to really learn to reach their true selves, their authentic selves, and do their work, and get over the conditioning that so much of society is conditioning us to be consumers, to fear the other, and to demonize people who aren't like us. And so it's going to really take an awakening, and it's going to happen one by one. What I like about working with leaders, when they become more conscious, more mindful, and really get that, they can have a profound impact on their organization, their nonprofits, or if they are activists in their neighborhoods too. So I like to say, whether it be on a small scale, one by one, how do we create little islands of sanity? And if there's
Mm-hmm.
enough islands of sanity, there'll be a tipping point.
You were mentioning Mandela. You were mentioning Tutu Desmond. You were mentioning Carl Sagan. These people don't seem to be around in this newer generation. What happened?
Now, yeah, that's we need heroes. Where are the
Yeah,
heroes right now? And I think that there is a real need for it, for people to come up and to say, to really speak with that true voice that comes
that's
from
right.
meaning, purpose, values, and really comes from that deeper self, not this made up conditioned self,
Mm-hmm.
but this, self that is really saying, you know what, we're all human
Yep,
and we are all family. And if you do something that's unjust to one, it hurts us all.
exactly. It seems like the true heroes ended when there has been the great leap forwards with technology.
Mm.
Common sense seems to have gone out the window.
Yeah, it's technology is helpful as it can be. It's very addictive.
Mm-hmm.
I know psychologists that say they would rather treat a meth addict than a teenager addicted to social media.
Oh
And
Lord,
so
yeah.
the technology has taken over. And when somebody's spending 3 hours a day on social media, they're more likely to be depressed, anxious, and in the case of many young women, even suicidal.
It
So
you know I
there you go.
I uh, I go onto the different social media sites at least once a day, and I just kind of browse, and
Hmm.
it's like everybody's an expert on a social media
Yeah,
platform,
yeah,
and when you actually take a look at what they're writing, they're idiots.
yeah. The loudest voices get the most clicks, it seems.
Yeah, exactly. And well, look at the newspaper industry. If it don't bleed, it don't lead.
Yeah, if it bleeds, it leads.
Yeah,
Now, fear gets a lot of clicks. There's a $1 billion industry making people angry and afraid,
yeah.
and to the detriment of our societies.
But it's also teaching us how to be liars, how to be fraud artists, how to be con artists. It's,
Hmm.
in my opinion, there's a lot of negativity out there, and we
Yes,
already have a 724, 365 news cycle, and the different
yes,
platforms just multiply that by a factor of 10.
yes, yes. And Freud's nephew, Bernice, Edward Bernice, he was the head of PR. And as a, illumined person, he went to the dark side and he realized that, don't worry about the truth. just say the same things over and over again.
Yeah.
People accept it as truth. And the big lie is just as easy to disseminate as the little lie. So, and when people unconsciously go to social media and hear the same thing over and over again,
Hmm.
that becomes part of their operating system, and the algorithms are going to feed that. And then, unfortunately, any data that doesn't conform to that pre-existing belief system will trigger the fight or flight response, the cortisol, the stress hormone. And so there we have it. That people are now. Um, I'm going to use the term not lightly, but brainwashed. This is propaganda. It works.
Exactly, exactly, and something that a lot of people do not realize that on media, on social media platforms, as well as the internet, there is subliminal advertising going on all the time.
Yes, yes. Even if you drive by a billboard that
Yep.
has a message, there's subliminal advertising. See happy people in a family, loving. We all want that, and then
Hmm.
they're drinking a soda, or they're have a product that's making them so happy. So we don't even have to think about it as we're driving by. The subliminal message is, if I have that, I'll have love, belonging, and a happy family.
How do we turn the dumbing down of the world into a rejuvenation of reality, truth, and honesty?
Well, I think we have to put the spotlight on it. So, what happens with when somebody is truly mad, let's say, they're absolutely convinced they're not.
Hmm.
And when we shine a light on it, and let's say if we watch TV, for instance, and there's a commercial, if we ask, well, how am I being conditioned to want something I don't need? If we can start asking that, how is this conditioning me? And so, what I have come to the conclusion with any media source, regardless if it's right or left,
Hmm.
if there is something that's triggering anger or fear in me, there's an agenda on it. So I'm very careful to say, okay, and then if something does, I try to think, oh, okay, so what is that agenda? And what are they trying to do? Are they trying to get clicks? Is this how they make their money? Or is there some kind of agenda that is behind it to make people behave and act? Um, I forget the psychologist who said this, but I think this is really true, and I think it's also to the core of it. If we can make someone believe the ridiculous, we can make them do the unthinkable.
That is so true.
Yeah.
Now, what role does culture play in organizational success, and how do you help teams align with a positive culture?
Well, I think I've worked with some teams in organizations that truly were unhappy. I'm hearing a little reverb. Is that me?
Everything sounds clear here.
Okay, good. So, what causes it? I think if a company or organization hasn't determined their shared values,
Hmm.
shared value of respect, and I think every organization needs to have, of course, their vision and their mission statement, which can constantly evolve, but there needs to be core values that we treat people with respect, we hold people accountable, upwards, downwards, lateral. That these are the kind of agreements that when people work here, that we have a social responsibility to each other, as well as social responsibility to make the world a better place for the community. Um, and I think if a company is not living that, and it's kind of like when we're out of integrity, it's like being in a rowboat. Every time we're out of integrity, we do something that's not honest or authentic, or we don't live up to promise, we drill a little hole in that boat and it gets harder and harder. And the worst case scenario was Enron, quite a few years ago, where you had the CEO and the CFO, and they were really pillaging and taking so much of the 401k and the profits of the company in their own pockets. Eventually, the whole company went bankrupt. So that's an extreme example. But to live in integrity, to have each individual be in integrity, and to have the companies and the organizations with their mission and vision, have a vision and mission that really is responsible, and that people are held accountable to embody, to living those values.
You've mentioned helping companies become learning organizations. Now, what does that mean in practice?
Well, I think individually, I think we don't get older until we stop learning. And there's an entrepreneurial spirit. There was a book I read, it was an audiobook I listened to many years ago, and it was called From Barbarians to Bureaucrats. And the barbarians would be like the Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and they have
Hmm.
the big vision. And then the next thing that happens, the bureaucrats take over, those that are task oriented. And this would be HR, payroll, systems, policies, procedures. And unfortunately, when these people take over, if they drive away the barbarians, the kind of visionaries, that's the beginning of the end of the um, organization. So, for an organization, I think truly to be adaptive and learning, you've got to have innovation. You've got to, of course, have results. You've got to have systems in place, and you have to have good relationships. And that's always evolving. And so now we're in this landscape where we have to deal with an unstable climate, an unstable economy, unstable geopolitical arrangements, allies that were once, very trusting, now becoming distant. All of these are going to mandate adaptation, and it's going to take little islands of sanity, or let's say bigger islands of sanity, so that we really commit to, doing our
Mm-hmm.
inner work, doing our work as a corporation or an organization, and saying, okay, as we're navigating this, how do we navigate this in the healthiest possible way? And the answers may come from within. There's so many talented people in organizations that great leaders have they may not have the answers, but they know how to ask the right questions.
So it's asking the right questions to get the responses that you may not know exist, and by listening to your employees or your team, you're actually able to make better. What's the word I'm looking for? Better.
Yeah, better procedures,
That's right.
outcomes.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, stand by, Peter.
Mm,
You and I have to take our
okay.
break at the bottom of the hour. And Exonation Peter Metzner is our very special guest this hour. www.dynamicchange.inc.com. That's dynamicchange.inc.com. And you're listening to us on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and on your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ AM in St. Catharines, streaming us around the world on classic1220.ca. I'm Rob McConnell. Peter Metzner and I return on the other side of this break, so don't go away.
Since Daddy had to fly, now that I know a place where we can go.
Peter Metzner is our special guest this hour, Exonation, www.dynamicchange.inc.com. Peter, how has the work of a coach like yourself changed after or during COVID? Where people worked out of their homes and the
Hmm.
entire way of doing business has changed forevermore.
Yes, yes. The first month, I remember everything came to a screeching halt. All
Hmm.
the in-person training programs that I had scheduled, even the in-person meetings that I would have. At that time, I was seeing a lot of people in person. I live in the Chapel Hill, Raleigh-Durham area, and so a lot of my work was local. Sometimes I'd fly to do an engagement. All that stopped, and for a month there was this great uncertainty. And then it occurred to me to get a Zoom account, and then before I knew it, I was talking to a lot of people on Zoom and adjusting. How do we create a high performing virtual team? How do we deal with uncertainty? I got asked to do talks and webinars on resilience, navigating change, dealing with uncertainty, and that type of thing. Mental health awareness. So there's been a huge need, and I think there's been a collective depression society-wide, if not worldwide. And I guess we can define a depression right now is when somebody feels bad about themselves, bad about their situation, bad about the future. So we have a lot of elements with that, with COVID, post-COVID, what's happening now. So there's a real need for people, I believe, that do the work that I do, to really help people become more, what's the right word, whole, heal,
Hmm.
develop a healthy approach to things, and then to ask the important questions. So, what kind of person do I need to be to navigate this, and what are the needs out there that I can address? And so, when we get to that point, there's a term called creative courage. Creative courage. How do we, out of all the pieces that have been broken, how do we put it together, and how do we maybe make it something better than was before? And the one silver lining with COVID was the technology. When I do classes, I teach a few classes online, and I have students that are in various states in geographic areas, even different countries. So it's eliminated the geographic boundaries, and yet it's had some challenges. I think there's an uptick of a sense of alienation, isolation, and loneliness. And these are things that are really detrimental to health and mental health that I think we have to really work hard to address.
People who work in the office are totally different from the way they work at home. At home, they have they have their own personal lives. They have their children. They have
Hmm.
neighbors, and they don't have to get dressed up to go to the office. And I'm sure that working from home has its advantages as well as its
Hmm.
disadvantages. Um, After COVID, everybody gets back to work, and all of a sudden, the employers are saying, "All right, you have to come back to the office." And a lot of these people said, no way.
Right.
So where does that put the employer, where he's basically looking at his staff now not being in the office? How can he monitor their productivity, their diligence, and how do you apply the changes to get them to come back to the office? Or, in your opinion, are they better off at home working?
Well, I think there's the whole spectrum of possibilities with that. I see some do hybrid. They say, okay, you can work 3 days at home, but we want to have you 2 days at work.
Hmm.
And there are many people willing to do that. I think when, depending on the business, you can measure productivity by the outcomes and by the actual output of the work. And I find in a lot of research places, when COVID hit, remember working with one scientist, and he was very introverted. And at that time, the open office was the kind of rage or the fashion at that time. And he said it was just so difficult. People would constantly come by to talk to him,
Hmm.
and he'd wear headsets, and people would still bother him. And he said when he got home, his output produced about 3 or 4 times what he was producing in the office. So I think it varies position to position, company to company. And some companies now they've saved quite a bit of money on not having to have office space, and there are some that just don't have the bandwidth to bring people back. Um, so I think a lot of it depends on the nature of the work, and some people when they have children and they work really well at night and they get the job done, that's a real plus. And then if they're mandated to go to office, what do you do with childcare and some of the other things that we have to be responsible for? So it's a very complicated issue, and there are some various creative ways. But I think if we are very rigid in saying this is the only way, we risk alienating, if not turning away some valuable employees.
My big question has always been, do we put too much faith into our technology? For example, what would happen if there was a solar flare like there have been in the past
Hmm.
and the internet's knocked out? Bang.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy,
We
that would
don't.
be
I'm sorry.
yeah, that would be a wake up call.
Yeah, in fact, we've seen it happen up here. I believe it was about 10, 12 years ago
Hmm.
when a solar flare took out all of Ontario as well as the northern parts of the United States.
Hmm.
And, you know, people were just panicking. Like, oh
I
my
bet.
God, you weren't born with this cell phone to your ear. Learn to live without it. You know,
Yeah.
back then we
Yeah.
were still having the copper wires. Like I
Hmm.
will always have copper wire phones, always,
Hmm.
because they're not affected by solar flares. And people just go into panic mode. And I'm just trying to imagine what happens now, 10 years later. Technology is that much more advanced. We depend on technology much
Hmm.
more. What would happen? Like,
Yeah.
are we ready for
Yeah.
something like that in the corporate world?
That's a really good question. I mean, people panic if they
Hmm.
don't have their cell phone with them at all times. If they leave the house even for a walk and they don't have their cell phone, they panic. And I marvel at that. And then I find I'm pretty much the same way. That cell phone is always with me.
Hmm.
And for some of the email accounts I need to access, I need two-factor authorization. So I couldn't even check my email without my cell phone
Right.
verifying my identity. So it would really bring us back to a state where we might have to learn how to talk to each other and how to work without the technology. And I think that may be something to really prepare for, because it isn't a given that something like a major hurricane, climate event, or God forbid, a geopolitical event
Yeah.
happens that disrupts our technology. And I think it would be a very good way to think about what we need to do to work through that.
And yet we don't hear about these kind of information centers where people are actually taught this. And I've
No.
often wondered, like why not? Like why not?
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get back. By the way, I love what you do, and I think
Well,
that people need to know what is out there and what their greatest asset is, how they can become stronger, more informed leader, because when
hmm.
they do this, their team does better and it's a win-win situation. So
For everybody.
let me ask you this. You emphasize mindfulness in leadership. How do you
Hmm.
integrate that into executive coaching?
Well, I think to really be self-aware, when somebody's psychologically mature, to me, they accept themselves, they
Hmm.
accept others, and they're responsible for how they impact others. And here's an example: when somebody is struggling, if I ask a leader or an executive, well, what's going on? And if I hear the answer to that, well, I seem to be the only one that cares, the alarm bell
Uh,
goes off in my head. Ding, 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 ding. Here's somebody that may be unaware that they're coming across critical, judgmental, micromanaging, or
hmm.
fear-based. And so it's kind of like the game that Eric Burns said years ago in the book Games People Play, is that we often act in ways to make people behave to justify how we feel. So I think the part of the mindfulness is being able to say, how is the realization that how I see people is how I treat people, how I treat people is how they become. And so what is the me that's seen? And when people start to gain that level of awareness and draw out the best, and it's kind of like bifocal vision, that even though I don't see the good qualities of this individual, but if I acknowledge them and note them, I draw them out. And unconsciously, often when we focus on the qualities of people we don't like, we will act in ways to make them behave to justify how we feel. And so that's the responsibility of leadership, to recognize the higher up a person goes, the more influence they have, the greater the impact they have on others, and also the greater the shadow that person have, those things that they're unaware of that could erupt and sabotage what that person most consciously needs or wants.
Peter, what are some of the most effective techniques that you use to help people overcome burnout or stagnation?
Yeah, I think burnout is easier to prevent than to recover from. And oftentimes, when I work with somebody that has a very challenging job
Hmm.
and they've got so many activities, I use just a simple graph, to have them kind of plot. On one axis, there's their perceived ability, And on the other axis, there's the perceived challenge. And if the perceived challenge is far greater than their ability or capacity, they're going to be in stress. So we could have a conversation activity by activity. So, okay, if you have an ability of 5, let's say, and you perceive the challenge of 12, then that's going to put you in stress, and it's unlikely that you're going to be effective. So then the question is, okay, what do we need to do to grow your ability, to get support? Or maybe, how do we let go of some things that right now are probably not going to be successful?
Can this method, or can these coaching sessions that you do, can these be used on any size business, from the very small business run by an entrepreneur to major corporations?
Yes, yes, they can. I think the part of it may be the scale of it.
Mm-hmm.
A very large corporation. What I did find when I did my stint at the Center for Creative Leadership, the most successful companies, there seemed to be a direct correlation between the amount of money they spent on coaching, training, and really working with their leaders. So I think for a larger company, it would be important to be strategic, to look at, well, who are the people who are high potentials in many of these very large companies before they allow somebody to get into the C-suite, vice president,
Right.
or these high-level jobs. These companies really make sure that that person has been doing their work through a battery of assessments like personality, emotional intelligence, 360 feedback, which we could talk about if you like too. But the aim is that if somebody's taken a huge role of leadership, they've got to be aware, and they have to be able to manage those aspects of their personality that they haven't yet fully integrated or aware of. Otherwise, they could do great harm to the organization and the people in it.
All right, Peter, stand by. You and I have to take our final break. Exonation, our guest this hour, Peter METZNER, his website, www.dynamicchangeinc.com. And we'll both be back as we wrap up this hour here in the X Zone from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario. You're listening to us on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, and your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ AM, streaming us at classic1220.ca.
Lawyers dwell on small details since Daddy had to fly. Now that I know a place where we don't you feel it growing day by day? People getting ready for the move. Some are happy, some are sad. Oh, we gotta let the music play. What the people need is a way to make them smile. It ain't so hard to do if you know how. Gotta get a message, get it all through. Lord, now mama's got you and you wild. Listen to the music.
Exonation, Peter METZNER is our guest of this hour. His website is dynamicchangeinc.com. Peter, what coaching tools or assessments do you find most helpful in identifying leadership potential?
Well, I usually start with personality, and I was trained first in Myers-Briggs, and I think that's valuable. I try to start with the 4 quadrants, something that's very simple, like the DISC. I use another one called People Map very regularly. But basically, there's a saying, you can't know yourself unless you know others, and you can't know others unless you know yourself. So from a basic personality standpoint, we can now see, here's what drives me, here's what motivates me, here's my style of communicating. And yet, to be effective, we need to understand the styles of others. And there are some people who are more the caregivers,
Yeah.
nurses, psychologists, therapists, coaches like myself. We tend to have the soft skills, and knowing that is helpful. But unless we develop the hard skills, life could be very traumatic. And those folks who rise the ranks of leadership, they often have the hard skills. They're driven, they're competitive, they're results oriented. And usually they get in trouble if they don't develop the soft skills like active listening, being open to ideas, and being very mindful of their decisions and valuing people. So in a sense, what gets people in trouble is the misuse or overuse of their strengths. So that's the starting point for me, and then I'll build on that with an emotional intelligence assessment, and in some cases 360 feedback. And some people would rather have a root canal, and what 360 feedback is doing a survey of, let's say, if you were to give 360 feedback to me, Rob, you'd
Hmm.
be maybe interviewing people who I work with, who report to me, my peers, and you'd be asking questions. So, what's it like working with Peter? What's he doing that's working well? What are some behaviors that aren't working so well? And then you'd present me with that report. And the point is, we can't address what we're unaware of. And even though many people would rather have a root canal than go through that, afterwards, many people say, you know what, everybody should go through this. It's kind of like a life review. So it's
Yeah.
really building on awareness. And then what I do, which is unique, but I think is becoming more and more in vogue since we've talked and I'm doing classes, but also our dreams, the dreams that we have at night. As Carl Jung said, in our dreams, we awaken who we are. So our dreams are going to give us a moment by moment daily commentary on, like the reins of a horse, if we're on the right track or wrong track. And for those that are willing, we also work with their dreams, and it's just amazing some of the breakthroughs that are unconscious. Our dreams will reveal about what we need to know but don't know in our waking life. And I find that to be also very exciting and profoundly fulfilling. When we have those encounters.
How do you tailor your approach when working with an individual versus an entire team?
Yeah, I think the intake would be fairly similar. Like, what's the current
Okay.
situation? Like, what is going on here? And what are the outcomes you'd like to see? So it's really doing an intake and asking questions. So, what's the current climate in a team or for an individual? So, what's your current situation? And what are the outcomes you'd like to
Hmm.
see? And then, as much as possible, try to see, well, what are the blocks? What are some of the things keeping you from getting there? And once they can start articulating that, that's very, very helpful. And then the next question is, okay, if we don't address these, what's in store? And that creates tension. So there's a kind of myth that coaches make people feel better. The initial meeting, at least, I want to ratchet up the tension in a question like, okay, so these are the blocks, these are the outcomes you like to see. And if we don't address these blocks or these issues or whatever we want to call them, what's in store? And if somebody says, well, that's unacceptable, well, then the answer is, well, that's what we're going to work on. So it really is tailored to each person's or team's or organization's current situation. And then to help them identify, well, what are the things? Here's what we want, but we're not sure how to get there. And if we don't address this, that's unacceptable. So that's where I or someone like me would come in.
Peter, can you give us a real world example of how your intervention helped turn around a struggling organization?
Yes. So during a pandemic, there was one company I worked with, and I don't want to name it, of course, but
Of course, yeah.
they made essential items that were necessary for pharmaceuticals and food. And because of the pandemic, they were short-staffed,
Hmm.
and there was turnover, people getting sick, and so yeah, things were in a mess. And this one encounter with the manager really says it all. And so he was stressed. One day, his son came to him and said, "Dad, what's wrong?" And he said, "There's nothing wrong." He said, "Well, Dad, you're not, you're chill. What's wrong?" And his dad said, "I'm chill. That's good. What's?" And he said, "Well, you're never like that." And then he got the aha that, oh, on his team, he started trusting them more, and he had more empathy for them, what they're going through. And even though he was short-staffed, rather than look over their shoulders and meddle in their work, he said, "I trust you. It's hard. We're going to do the best I can. I trust you." And then when he went home, he trusted them,
Hmm.
and he felt so much better. And what had happened, his particular department was more productive than they were even pre-COVID. And he realized, my gosh, when I trust people, and when they recognize that I have their back, then all of a sudden their performance goes up. And here he was, short staffed, and they were meeting and exceeding the things that they needed to do. And I'll never forget that story too. Um, I could tell you some more if there's time. I
Sure,
don't know
just
how
give
much
it,
time we
yeah.
have left.
We've got about 5 minutes before we have to say so long. So give us
Okay.
one more, because I've got a couple more
Okay.
questions.
So here's one more story. So going back to how trust is one of the essential elements of a high-performing team,
Hmm.
there's a manufacturing company I worked with one time, and we'd done some training, working with building trust, getting people to give feedback effectively, take it non-defensively, and the accountability piece is holding all levels accountable, not just downward, but lateral and upward. So I followed up with the general manager of this company, and I said, "Well, how's it going?" It's 3 months later. How's it going? And he said, "My gosh, we're 20% over forecast on deliverables." This was pre-pandemic.
Wow.
And I asked him, I said, "How do you explain that? That's awesome. That's wonderful. How do you explain that?" He said, "Well, they trust each other, getting along." And here's the example that he gave. There was a particular meeting, and one of the managers who was leading a project got angry because there were mistakes, deliverables were not right. There were shortages, deliverables. Things weren't getting done the way they
Hmm.
needed to. He erupted. He got angry. He yelled, banged his fist on the table, meeting over. Well, one of his direct reports came to him and said, "Joe, I know you didn't mean to, but did you see when you went off that the meeting ended and nobody said a word? That was that." And he thought for a moment of his training and he said, "You know what? That took courage, for you to say that. Thank you very much." The next meeting, he apologized to the group and he said, "Folks, if I ever do that again, please hold me accountable. I'm going to commit not to, but please hold me accountable." And that was the example he gave, that they trust each
Wow.
other so much that they're holding each other accountable. They're doing it respectfully. And he said, "I can't attribute it to anything else. We have the same amount of people, the
Hmm.
same economy, the same customers, and we are 20% over forecast because people trust each other and they're getting along and they're very maturely holding each other accountable in a respectful way, which, by the way, is the most effective way."
What is the one piece of advice that you'd offer someone stepping into a leadership role for the first time?
I would say to really do your work on becoming self-aware. And, I work with so many leaders that they have all the right degrees, the
Hmm.
skills, the industry knowledge. But the bottom line is if people don't trust you, and we only trust people who we feel care about us, that it's going to be so important to develop the interpersonal skill, to have empathy and the ability to be able to communicate in a way that engages people rather than shames them or puts them on. So I think that's really, I think, the crux of it. That with all of the technology and the degrees and the
Hmm.
experience that people have, if people aren't following, you're not leading. And so the ability to develop heart, emotional intelligence, and to be able to convey that I care about you, you matter, what you do matters, and together we're going to do meaningful things. It makes leadership easy. When people embody that, it's so fulfilling. And then they go home like that manager, and the son thinks there's something wrong because they're relaxed and chill.
Gotcha. Um, my final question is what trends are you currently seeing in leadership development that excite you or concern you?
Oh boy. I guess what excites me there is becoming more and more and more research and development and verification that when there's psychological safety, people flourish, they
Hmm.
grow, they're creative, and they move forward. And that to me is exciting, is that it's known there, and that emotional intelligence, we all can develop it, some more than others, and that's exciting that we have the tools, the insight, we know it works. The thing that is disappointing to me is that here in the States, Americans even don't like each other. There's just so much animosity to people who believe differently, and there's so much disinformation and misinformation and silos. And to me, it's very discouraging to see how the impact of that and how people who normally could trust each other don't trust each other,
Yeah.
and because they have different constructs about the world, they demonize people who don't believe in that. And that to me is very discouraging. And I think that's something we're going to have to really, really work through.
Well, my friend, the time has come when you and I must say so long for tonight. I want to thank you ever so much for joining us, Peter, and X Zone Nation. If you'd like to find out more about Peter, www.dynamicchangeinc.com. Thanks for joining us tonight, Peter. Take care.
Well, thank you, Rob. My pleasure. An honor.
All right. Thank you, sir. And a big thank you to Peter for joining us tonight and sharing such valuable insights on leadership, personal growth, and organizational transformation. Like I said, if you'd like to learn more about Peter's work, his coaching programs, or how Dynamic Change Inc. can support you or your team or your company, be sure to visit his website at www.dynamicchangeinc.com. Once again, www.dynamicchangeinc.com. Always remember, stay mindful, stay motivated, and keep making dynamic changes in your corner of the world. All right, hour number 2 of the X Zone starts on the other side of this very short message. But once again, I'd like to remind you that you're listening to the X Zone radio show right here from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, just down the street from your hometown radio, Classic 1220, CFAJ AM, that stream us around the world at classic1220.ca. And you're listening to us on the X Zone Broadcast Network, Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network. And for all of you who are wondering, when is the next edition of the X Chronicles newspaper come out? Well, June the 5th, my friends. It'll be on sale at retail establishments, newspaper stands, as well as online. For more information, visit xchronicles.net. I'm Rob McConnell. We'll be back on the other side as hour number 2 here in the X Zone starts right now.